Joining me this week is Lindsay Titus, an educator for 16 years. Lindsay has worked as a classroom teacher and behavioral specialist in public school, residential, and private settings. She is currently an assistant principal, and she is driven to teach other educators how to transform connections and relationships with all students. She also helps educators transform their own lives by finding their authentic purpose and their passion both inside and outside the classroom. Lindsay is also the host of the Define University, and that U is spelled YOU, the Define University podcast, to which I am a subscriber. So I'm very much looking forward to having Lindsay here. Lindsay, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. This is obviously our first time meeting face to face. We've been connected online, and certainly I've been a consumer of your content, and we've exchanged messages and things like that. But of course, this is the first time face to face. I'm a listener of your podcast. I'm a follower of your work. So I am really excited that you're here today, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So before, though, we dive into the substance of the conversation that we're going to have today, highlight for us, I gave some of the highlights in the introduction, but maybe put a little more substance behind the resume, the journey so far. You know, where did you begin your career? How did you end up where you are today as someone who's really focused on the adults in the education system in terms of both how they guide student behavioral change, as well as how they rediscover their own passions for life in and outside the classroom? So take us through that journey, Lindsay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's unique, as you mentioned, is I've had a lot of roles in education in a variety of different settings. And that was not intentional. That was not my plan going into this career. Way back in second grade was the year that I was like, I'm going to be a teacher. I had a phenomenal second grade teacher. I had just moved to Buffalo from Canada, and she made me feel so welcome. She made me feel a part, even though I had, I sounded different. I really didn't know what was going on. And she really kind of planted that seed. And that seed was very much like my goal for really through high school, through college. I had no doubts I'm going to be a teacher. In college, I fell in love with the field, the specialized programming within special education. So I was like, okay, great. I'm narrowed in a little bit more. I'm going to be a special educator. That's going to be my career. That's it. I landed a job my first year out where I had student taught. About 3 months in, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And it was so scary because of like, wait a second, this was my life's passion. This is the only thing that I'd seen myself doing. And I luckily had some really supportive mentors and friends around me that said, just keep at it. You can do this. And I ended up teaching for about 5 years in a self-contained special education classroom. During that time, though, I noticed I was going home. And I think something that's really important for anybody, but educators especially, is pay attention to our thoughts, right? Sometimes I think we want to run away from those thoughts. We want to just like take the teacher hat off and be like, I don't want to think about it till tomorrow. But I found myself really paying attention to those thoughts at night. What was keeping me up? What couldn't I figure out? And at that time, it was behavior. I was going home, really thinking about my students' behavior. Why can't I get this kid to do that? What is happening? Where's the disconnect? Why is he doing this? Why is she doing that? And that was the part that I really had no answers. In my both undergrad and master's, I had like one class in management and behavior. So I really was lost. And so I went back to school at that point and became a board certified behavior analyst, and really fell in love with behavior change and studying human development. Why do we do the things we do? And so the next 10 years, I really had different roles in behavior. So behavior specialist, behavior consultant, lots of different labels, but different areas. I worked for a non-for-profit for a long time, and I very well might still be there if it didn't close. It closed automatically. I didn't have a choice to leave that one. That chapter ended outside of my control. I did some in-home therapy. I worked at a residential center. Ultimately, though, my family goals became really important, and I wanted to get back into the public school sector as I had started. And so at my current district, I was a behavior specialist for 4 years. And then last year transitioned into assistant principal where I am now, heading into year 2 as that. So the behavior piece kind of stemmed from those early years. The wellness, the burnout, the understanding who you are, that came because I had my own burnout. I was ready to be done. I couldn't do it anymore. And I was a chaser. I kept finding well, maybe this job will be the job where I finally have balance. Maybe this will be the job where I can finally feel like I want to feel. And what I finally realized is I was never going to find it outside of myself. It always had to come from within. And so I learned how to do that inner work, which is what I then teach and coach, because it's not, we don't often learn it if we don't seek it out to do that. So once I had learned it and done it myself, I could teach others. And I think that's a huge thing. Like, we all have skills that we can teach others. And so as soon as I felt like I was comfortable in my own skin in what I could do, and really had this renewed passion for life inside and outside of the classroom, I was able then to share that. And so that's really where Define University came from. So I could coach others so they too could be living this lifestyle, because it's totally doable for anybody out there.
Right. It's so fascinating to me that so many of us, generally, we try to chase that happiness, we try to chase that satisfaction with something outside, something tangible, and time again we come back to the idea that this is, what do they call that? This is an inside job. This is something where within ourselves we need to find that and stop chasing it from the outside. But I think, Lindsay, we have to go back to something you mentioned, which I'm sure listeners, you may have heard it in the beginning. You lived in Canada. And of course, being someone who is from Canada, from Vancouver, we always get excited when Canada is mentioned. So are you Canadian, or are you just a wannabe? What's happening here, Lindsay? Talk to me about this Canada experience you had.
So I was born in Canada. I was born in Brampton, outside of Toronto.
Absolutely. See, I knew I liked you.
And I am American. I became American when I was 21. So
Okay.
I went through the whole naturalization process when I was 21, and have been a citizen since. But other than my immediate family, everybody else still lives in and around Ontario. So I haven't seen them in a few years, but I'm excited that the
Yeah.
borders have opened up and I can now start seeing them a little bit more often.
So were you a Canadian citizen by birth and then you changed your citizenship, or do you have dual citizenship at this point?
I don't. So I had to pick. So
Oh,
apparently,
you
if
had
you're
to
over
pick.
18, you have to say which one you want. And
Oh,
so I
okay.
knew, I was going to be in the States. At that point, I had met who's now my now husband, and so
Yeah,
I was like,
yeah,
we're gonna do it.
right.
But yes, have those Canadian roots for sure.
All right. Once a Canadian, always a Canadian, Lindsay. You're always welcome back across the border, of course. You know how it works. Now, listen, we are in late August here, and at this point, every educator is either been back to work for a month, they've been back to work for a few weeks, or they are on the cusp of going back to work just after Labor Day. So everyone at this point is in startup mode, and I want to talk to you about that from an educator's perspective. I'm sure that real balance in education is really hard to achieve because, listen, the job is just that demanding. But I do think it's important that educators find some semblance of balance to sustain themselves throughout the year. And so often teachers, administrators, even central office staff come back and they say, okay, this is the year. This is the year I maintain balance. This is the year I pull it all together. But inevitably, for so many, that plan unravels and they're right back where they swore they never were going to be. They're overwhelmed and they're just trying to survive. So, from your perspective, Lindsay, um, what are some of the most effective strategies or approaches that you've seen that help educators, teachers, administrators help them avoid that physical and or that emotional drop off that can happen during the year?
Mhm. Yeah, and it absolutely can, right? So I think of kind of two things. I think the first, I think it was kind of like the resolutions, right? That we set resolutions in January and by February they're gone. I used to be a resolution person. I am not anymore. I pick a word for each year. I'll tie this in just a second. But I think what's more important that I do each year is I reassess the standards that I live by. So many people will set boundaries. I don't necessarily do boundaries because I think boundaries will get broken at certain times and places. And then I know for myself, I always felt like, oh, I broke that boundary, got to start over. Whereas for me, I pick standards that I live by. So standard for me is I check my energy. I check in on my own energy every single day. That way I don't get to, the middle of the year and I realize, man, my energy's gone because I've checked it every single day. That's a standard I live by. It's a non-negotiable. So I think part of this process is to also knowing that how you almost can like know how you're going to feel, right? Like if every year, if you know yourself, if you, and just think about it, right? By about November, December, are you a November person? Are you a December? Maybe you're a March. Where is it that if we have this information, I coach this on, student behavior all the time. If you have a student's behavior, you can do like preventative, kind of visualization, right? If this student does this, I'm going to do this. Well, it's the same thing here you can do for yourself. I'm going to do these things. Knowing that I myself get frustrated, get less energy in November, here's what I'm going to do. Like, own it, right? I guess is what I'm trying to say is like, own that it's going to happen. Don't try and like hide from it. Be honest with yourself, because then you're going to be more in tune to using strategies. So a couple that I absolutely love is a couple years ago dropped the word balance. Again, I'm a very big word person and a visual person. So for me, balance, I think of a scale, I think science class, and I think 50-50. And we all know that's not possible. So I switched balance for blended. And so I always say I live a blended lifestyle, but I'm always 100% me. And so if I'm starting to feel, again, off balance, I'll use that word. Like if I'm starting to feel off centered, I will remind myself I'm 100% me. And what does that mean? That means on some days I might work 80% and I might have family 20%. That is actual, that might happen. But I then get to choose. Maybe Saturday then is 95% family, 5% define you. I get to decide, and so do you, right? You get to decide what those percentages are. Now you don't have to get so analytical, but it's that concept that you get to blend it all together if it's meaningful to you. So I keep that mindset at the forefront, and then do those energy check-ins. I do them like about 3 times a day. When I first started, I put reminders on my phone and would have them, and I just do like a 1 to 5 mental scale. Where am I? If I'm like 5, I'm like 4 or 5, I'm good. Awesome. I celebrate it. If I'm like a 1 or a 2, okay, what am I going to do to raise my energy? Do I need water? Did I eat yet today? Do I need to go walk around my building? Do I need to get outside? Do I need to phone a friend? Like, what do I need to kind of do I need to listen to some music? I have an Energizer playlist on my phone. Do I need to like listen to some pump me up music? Those truly do, because it brings it all to the present, right? Brings it all to this very moment, which is where we can make change happen. The other thing is schedule in advance, right? Schedule things that you're going to look forward to. I always do at the beginning of every month, I pick 2 days on the weekends where I put a big heart on the calendar. Those are me days. And right now they're me/family days. I get to decide, so that if someone calls me up and says, hey, do you want to come and do this? And I look and there's a heart, I'm going to pause for a second and say, you know what? I already planned something that day. Could we do another day? Or maybe I say yes, if it is something I want. The point is, so often I hear from so many people, and I was in the same boat, we get to the end of the month, we're like, man, where'd my weekends go? Right? I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything that I wanted to. Well, you got to schedule it in. So if December is your tough, go schedule things now, right? Figure out what it is you love. If you want to get away, if you want to have, whatever it is that brings you joy, go schedule it, get it on your calendar now, so that you're not trying to do it reactively. You can actually do it proactively to make sure it happens. The last thing is kind of know your own pain points, right? So know what drains your energy, because that's you, right? So for me, it was to-do lists. To-do lists drained my energy completely, right? Just looking at it, I would have this moment of panic, like never going to get done. I can't do it all. And so I shifted. A to-do list for me is no more than 3 things. I use a Post-it because that fits small things. Anything more goes on a brain dump list, and that's it. It's not a to-do list, it's a brain dump. It's just something I thought of. So for me, I don't really even use to-do lists anymore. Like, it's gotten to the point where I'm like, it'll get done. I'll put it on my calendar and it's done. Boom. I don't need to write it on a list, because that was draining my energy, right? I wasn't feeling productive. Therefore I wasn't feeling worthy. Then you're feeling down, and that doesn't feel good. But you have to know what's your own pain point, so then you can think of a way to kind of counteract that. But I think it really is being prepared. It's knowing what's coming and making sure that we're already kind of thinking ahead, so we can start practicing those today when we are calmer, when we are a little bit less chaotic, I'll say.
Yeah, well, that's true. I've often thought about the expression over the years that if it's predictable, it's preventable. And I think that's really what you're referring to here, is that unless you're brand new to the profession, you have a sense of what your year might look like. And therefore, you can kind of know where those ups and downs come from. The idea of being metacognitive, right? Being aware of yourself. It's interesting to me that so often we as educators talk about the importance of metacognition for students in terms of their own learning. And yet we ourselves don't make the connection to how important it is to be reflective and metacognitive about our own wellness and our own ups and downs. Why do you think that is? Just to throw that at you. Why do you think we fail to make that connection sometimes as educators?
I think because every definition of teaching is always student driven. It's always about student learning, student growth.
Hmm.
It's really not ever centered on like who am I, right? I've always said
Hmm.
if I could go back, or one of my big lofty goals is to redo some like new teacher prep programs and have a mindset course in there, or a self help sounds corny, but where you learn this mindset work, because
Hmm.
you lose yourself so quickly. We're so compassionate to our students, and we forget. I think we solely forget because that's not what is prioritized. And so
Right.
if we don't prioritize it for ourselves, nobody's going to do it for us.
Hmm.
And so to me, that's it. I just think it's not prioritized as much as, you think teacher, you think students, right? Student growth. That's usually the word association that would come. We don't think teacher self-understanding.
Yeah. We have been both conditioned outside, but also inside, put students at the center, and therefore to sacrifice our personal time, our any downtime, because we should always be putting our students at the center. And then society has a tendency to make teachers feel guilty about
Mhm.
taking time for themselves as well. So I think it's wise advice to set up some sort of system or think about a way that you can manage your wellness ahead of time, rather than when you're in the midst of the chaos and now it's triage, as opposed to having a plan to maintain that. Now, beginning of the year, of course, it's also a time for us to build strong relationships with students. And this is a time where we forge those relationships, and they don't necessarily develop overnight. You don't just walk in the first week and you've got this deep relationship. And for some students, it takes them a long time to kind of let their guard down. Who is this adult and who am I working with here? But if we think about this more generically, what are some ways that so two questions. What are some ways that teachers, educators can begin to build really strong, and I think the key word for me is authentic relationships with their students? And the second part is, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to have a strong, authentic relationship with your students? How do I know I've got that kind of relationships with my kids?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that is so important for educators to do is really define the words that you're using, right? So, and probably no surprise, I mean, my business is Define University. So, like, defining words is really important to me. But
Yeah.
I think it's a really great exercise for your listeners to do right now. Like, jot down, what does strong mean to you and what does authentic mean to you? Because if you
Mhm.
don't have that basis, right, of a definition, anything's going to sound good. Anything's going to, be in there. And so for me, I think doing that first, right? So strong, and I kind of lump them together. So strong and
Sure.
authentic to me means both individuals are showing up as themselves. So if we break that down even further, that means I have to know myself. And then my student has to know themselves. Well, I work in a junior high. My students don't know themselves yet. They do at a surface level, right? I
Right.
mean, they're learning
Yeah.
and they learn every day. But I also
Mm.
have to honor that. And so I think if we are looking to create relationships, which I don't think there's an educator out there that wouldn't say that's not, the number one importance. But I think we also have to remember it is a process. It's something that you practice every single day. To me, it's I said, I don't love to-do lists, and the reason for it is because I think the things that really should be on to-do lists are things like that, right? Connecting with
Mhm.
students, building relationships, um, gratitude practice. Those are things we get to practice every single day, both as educators and just human beings.
Mhm.
And so for me, showing up as, having that strong, authentic relationship with a student it completely anchors to honesty. It's not sugar coated. It's not, just a positive, you're doing great, but you're able to have those real courageous conversations with your students at the level that they're at, right? It's going to look very different with a kindergartner than it is a ninth grader. And so I think being able to agree and disagree, respectfully with one another, being
Mhm.
able to share insights that match the relationship, right? So a teacher, or an AP to a student is going to be different than me to my own child at home. Um, to me, it comes down to not taking things personally, but staying personally connected to that person, right?
Mhm.
And also learning to hear through what they're saying. So I think when it's authentic, you're able to know that there's a filter, right? When I'm hearing things, I'm going to filter it based on my own bias, based on my own experiences, based on who I am. And so really making sure that I am working with that student to fully understand where they're coming from. But I think I could go on for hours, but the easy answer to me is that it's honest. It's an honest understanding between two people.
Yeah, that honesty, showing up as yourself. I love that. That's the authenticity. I think when it's strong, it can withstand the ups and downs, the disagreements, because you know that there is a strength or a bond there for sure. I want to throw a scenario your way because I think many teachers kind of face this scenario that can be challenging. Let's imagine that this year I'm a classroom teacher and I'm teaching a student that I had last year. And last year, our relationship, let's just say our relationship was tense and we didn't, it was just less than favorable. We really didn't get along. It's not about, assigning blame. It's just, it is what it is. We had a really rough year together and we just didn't sort of align. And now next year or this coming school year, here I am, I'm teaching that same student. What is some advice that you would give to that teacher as they go in, they look at that class roster and they kind of have that moment of pause where they think, oh boy, here we go again. And students probably thinking the same thing when they look at their schedule. So advice for teachers on how to handle a situation where you're teaching a student that you had before where the relationship was less than favorable.
Yeah, so I think it's two parts, right? So I think the first part is we have to work through those, oh my goodness, feelings first. Do those at home, do those in your office or your classroom. Don't do them with the student.
Right.
Because we have to, again, one of my goals is to help people stop running from their emotions, right? I think so often you shouldn't feel that. And I have a thing with should, get out of shouldville because it's not a good place to be. And so if you look at your class roster and you get that feeling, honor it. Say, okay, I'm feeling something. Where is this coming from? Right? It's that trigger component. What about this is triggering me? What didn't happen last year that I want to happen this year? That reflection piece. And it doesn't mean it has to take all day or all week. It can be a 5-10 minute, little activity. But if we don't honor that immediate emotional response we had, we're gonna see it in the classroom because there's gonna be no way because we haven't addressed it. And in order, I always think emotions are energy in motion. They're meant to move. So if we try and stuff it down, and this is coming from someone that's a notorious stuffer, I don't want to deal with it. I'm just gonna pretend it didn't happen. Not gonna happen. That was me for years. Now I get that feeling. I'm like, oh, where'd that come from? What's that telling me? What do I need? What am I looking to unpack? So I think we have to do that work so we know what is going on. And then when we're in that place, again, I think it comes back to an honest conversation with the student where we are owning our part, right? I'm here to recognize that last year did not go how I would have wanted. I'm curious your thoughts, and give them the time and space, right? Give them the floor to agree or disagree. And really to not force, I think it's really important that we don't force a relationship because some students, as you alluded to earlier, just aren't ready for it. And I use that. I'm very real with the students that I work with to say, I understand if you might not be ready, know that I am here. I'm going to keep showing up. This is how I like to show up. Does that work for you? How would you like me to show up? How would you like me to know that? Because I think something I always come back to too is we want to be 100% invested, right? 100% invested in this relationship, but I'm only 50% of that relationship. Right? A relationship has to be two people. So if it's me and a student, I can bring 100% of me, but it's only 50%. And so not forcing it and having, I think, a lot of small conversations, right? This is the power of the 30 seconds at a time versus we're going to sit down for an hour and have a powwow. That's not probably going to do much. But if we just show up in whatever that looks like, the hays, the highs, the how was the game last night? Hey, I noticed this. Just asking questions even. Hey, my nephew is your age and his birthday's coming up. Any ideas for a present? Just things that you can get the student talking, I think take some of that formality out of it. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. As you were talking there, you reminded me of that expression. It's more about friendship necessarily than teacher-student relationships, but it's still, I think holds true, that friendship isn't one big thing, it's a million little things. And it
Mhm.
seems that building a relationship and recovering from that, say, 10th year that you had last year, is not about the big epic conversation. It's about the little things, it's the day-to-day interactions, and slowly beginning to shift the paradigm around that relationship. So it makes a lot of sense to me, for sure. And we still know, of course, Lindsay, that tough days are going to happen to us, whether it's with students, whether it's with parents who are upset with you. Maybe there's a colleague with whom you have some tension, a particularly challenging situation with a student or whatever. Now, going to your podcast now, in episode 92, you walked listeners through 4 steps that you use to rebound from a tough day. So I thought maybe you could share that with us. The tough days happen. This is a really challenging profession. We're going to have those tough days. What are the strategies? How do we rebound from a tough day and not let that become a tough week or a tough month?
hmm Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's so important to recognize, again, they will happen, right? And
Yeah.
I will always go back to, again, I used to be someone like, if the first 30 minutes of the day were challenging, the day was ruined, right? It's a challenging day. So I think even just the way that we talk about the days or talk about these moments is really important. So now I've shifted my language that it's not a challenging day, it's a day that had challenging moments in it, or it's a day that had some tough moments in it, even if they were all day. I don't want to say all, because I guarantee there was some sliver of the day that was not tough. And having 2 young kids at home, like there's no way that a hug from my kid is ever tough. Like that's the grateful part of my day, right? Maybe on some days. And so I think it's really important that we do that. But the 4 steps that I take after these days that have those challenges where you just want to bang your head against the wall, or you're just so frustrated, or in the episode I mentioned, for me it's tears. I have to shut my office door because the tears are coming. That's how I know I've reached, that point for me. The first step is very, very probably obvious, but it's giving yourself grace. But I go beyond that, because I think grace, and I learned this over the last 10 months when I kind of had my own season of pause as I was pregnant with my second child, is I think we say a lot of times that we give ourselves grace, but we don't actually practice it. We don't actually put it into action. And so the first step for rebounding for me is doing that. And it's hard because I can't say here are the 5 ways to show yourself grace or to practice, but it still alludes to feeling the feelings, right? Giving yourself permission to sit with it, or giving yourself permission to not know the answer, giving yourself permission to figure it out, giving yourself permission to cry, giving yourself permission to call a friend and ask for help. Like, what is it that you're going to do to really show yourself that you are human, that you are allowed to have these emotions? The second one is feel the feels, is sit with the emotion. That's so hard for so many of us. I always say start with 15 seconds. Because again, anytime I say a strategy, I think so many of us, our minds go, that's going to take so long. And I don't have time in my day to do another thing. I want you to flip that. I want you to honor that there's always enough time. Just make that switch right now, because there truly is always enough time. And then you're not chasing more time. But sit for 15 seconds and see what is that actual feeling. Is it truly boredom? Is it stress? Is it anxiety? Is it frustration? Is it happiness? What is it? Label it so that we can then move forward. The third step is to find some gratitude in something. So I do it in the situation. I'm at a point now where I will say, I'm grateful for this. This is pushing me. This is pushing me outside my comfort zone. I'm doing something that's probably really hard. That's why it's challenging me. And I'm grateful for that, because I know I'm going to grow. I didn't start out there. I started out, I'm grateful for every other positive thing, right? I'm grateful for a supportive principal. I'm grateful for that cup of coffee I had this morning. I'm grateful for the sunshine. You can't do it wrong. That's the beauty with gratitude. You cannot do that practice wrong. And so practice that gratitude. And then the fourth step is to really anchor in and learn the lesson. And that may not happen that day, but everything is happening to teach us so we can grow and we can expand in who we are. And so when we can, through reflection, through honestly just thinking about it, sometimes talking about it, writing it out, when we find the lesson, that's how we know it was purposeful. There still was a reason that day was challenging. And when we find that lesson, then it's a little bit easier to move forward and not kind of try and hold on to it, right? We can like detach and let it be. And now it's a new day.
I know that some people kind of bristle at this idea of everything happens for a reason. And I know that can be cliche at sometimes, but I do think it's important for us to take lessons out of these experiences. And a lot of times you don't know what that lesson is or that quote unquote reason is until after the fact. And it really isn't about like, this is divine intervention causing you grief for a month or a week, but it's really about the idea that how am I growing as an individual, right? I also really appreciated your, the idea of feel the feels that resonated with me when I first listened to that episode, because that's something I've learned to do over the course of my career, which is to give myself, like, own those feelings, give myself an opportunity to honor those feelings, even if it's for a short period of time, have my pity party, and then find a way to move forward on it. And I certainly appreciated those strategies as well. I want to finish up with something else that you talked about on your podcast as well. Nothing like everybody bringing up all your past episodes, right? But something else you talked about on the podcast, and I think you kind of alluded to this earlier, but I want to expand on this, and it's this idea of how do I know the difference between procrastination and rest, right? I think as teachers, administrators, we can always be working. The job is never done. There's always something that could be done. And so am I procrastinating? Am I resting? Like I think you did allude to this a little bit tangentially, but I want to come back to it because I think this is a really important point for educators, that we've got to find time to rest. We've got to find time for our own wellness. But how do I know the difference between procrastinating and rest?
Mm-hmm. So I look at them, and this might be the behavior, the behavior side of me. I look at procrastination as reactive. I'm not doing something because I'm reacting to a stressful situation, just feeling overwhelmed, right? More of some of those more, I'm going to call them negative, but they're not really negative, but negative side of the emotion. Whereas for me, rest, I label resting with intention. So that's, again, I mentioned standards in the beginning of the episode. I rest with intention every day. Now, some days that's 3 minutes. Some days it's an hour, right? It varies. The difference is before I rest, whatever that looks like. Maybe it's a walk. Doesn't mean, laying down, but it might be a walk, listening to a podcast, going to a park, whatever it might be. In my head, I say, I am resting to, and then what's the purpose? Why am I resting right now? To give my mind, an opportunity to just relax from today, to spend time with my daughter so that I can be ready for the meeting I'm having in an hour, whatever it is, right? There's no right or wrong, but I think that's the difference, right? Procrastination, you're generally running from something, and resting is you're getting ready for something. So I look at them as kind of opposite sides of the spectrum. And I think if you kind of want to figure out which one it is, ask yourself why. Right? Why am I not doing X, Y, and Z? Or why do I feel this way about X, Y, and Z? I think resting usually has more of a purpose. Procrastinating is I'm kind of avoiding something.
Yeah, we all tend to do that for sure. I sometimes subscribe to this notion of do something. So I've often found myself in situations where, like, I don't feel like writing, or I don't feel like editing, or I don't feel like doing some heavy lifting. So I say, well, you got to do something. Let's make this time productive. And I do something, sort of some of the menial tasks, right? Do some paperwork, or do some, getting things organized or whatever. So I find myself at least getting productive when I have those moments where I just don't feel like doing the heavy lifting, finding those ways to at least keep moving forward, even if it's a menial task. I can get something done. Before we finish up here, Lindsay, any final words of wisdom or advice for educators as they embark on the 2022-23 school year? What are some things? Obviously, the pandemic is still around, not the same as it was a few years ago, but it's still there, and something we also have to deal with. So any final thoughts, words of wisdom as people sort of get energized for the new school year?
Yeah, so I use analogies a lot. And so the analogy I want to share is, and it's ironic you're wearing a hat because it has to do with a hat.
All right, perfect.
But I do, what's your vision? Is it hat on or hat off? And so what that means is, if you have a ball cap on, your field of vision is limited. You're a little bit skewed. You can turn your head and look, left and right, but just your periphery is blocked a little bit. Whereas if you take your hat off, you have a much wider view. And so my reminder with that is to remember that there's going to be situations that you need your hat on. You have to stay focused. You got to stay in your lane, do your thing, and trust that that's the way to go. There's going to be other times, maybe it's a new unit you can explore with, or a new strategy. Like, take the hat off, expand, and just kind of take it all in. and recognize your whole year does not have to be hat on, like head down, like let's go 100 miles an hour. You can take the hat off and truly look around, see what your neighbor teacher is doing, see what the person down the hall is doing. Find a friend online and see what's going on. Check in with them. And so I've heard it kind of relate to like front view, like front row at the theater, and then balcony view. I think you just know that you're going to have both, and know that that's okay. Give yourself permission to take the hat. I think as educators, sometimes we just need permission to take the hat off in that analogy, because we do say it's okay to take the hat off and go just be you this weekend and let schoolwork stay at school. Like that is okay. But I think the reason it's so hard for so many of us is because we don't give ourselves permission to do it, because it becomes a should. And so stay out of shouldville by honoring, I'm taking the hat off and I'm going to leave it here, and it's going to be there, and I'm going to put it on with pride Monday morning, and I'm going to be there for it. But understand you're going to ebb and flow with that throughout the year.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. And I think one more thing I might add, hey, I like your analogy, but I'm going to add something to it. That's not really what I'm doing here. But what it makes me think of is that our hats are on and off at different points during the year. So if, for example, as a teacher, your hat is on and you're focused and someone else's hat is off, that is not the time for the, wow, must be nice to not have to be so this, or must be nice not have to do that. It makes me think that we need to be able to step back a little bit from that and honor the fact that our ebbs and flows are different from one another. And because your hat is on doesn't mean my hat needs to be on, that I could maybe be pulling back a little bit, have that balcony view while you're in the front row, because at some point during the year, you're going to be in the balcony and I'm going to be in the front row. I'm going to have my hat on. You're going to have my hat off. I think we need to be kind to one another and not sort of eat our own, as we on occasion can sometimes do when we're in the midst of our chaos as well. Right. So two questions as we finish up today, Lindsay. I really appreciate the conversation. These are questions that I ask everyone who comes on the podcast. And here's the first one, and you can take this in any direction that you want to. But educationally speaking, the question is, what keeps you up at night?
So we kind of alluded to it earlier, and it really relates to this concept of how do I help teachers? How do we help teachers define who they are? How do we allow teachers to be more than the teacher, and be proud of that, right? How do we, change or alter or update, revamp, whatever it is, new teacher programs, so that they're coming in knowing values and missions and all of these things for themselves as well as their classrooms. I think that's such a big part that's missing. And so I'm constantly racking my brain, like, what are other ways that we can get this work into the world?
Yeah, for sure. That definitely is a worthy reason to be kept up at night, for sure. Last question as we finish up today, and this is a question you can answer personally, you can answer it professionally, you can answer it in both ways. Again, take this in any directions you want, but it really has to do with how you personally define success. If a random person stopped you on the street and asked you, what is your definition of success? How would you answer them?
So if you had asked me this question 5 years ago, I would have given you some like tangible response, right? Like, when this happens, I will be successful, because success for me was always something you attained. And again, through all of this work that I've done, I've learned that if you have something out here in the future, it's going to stay in the future. So we've got to bring it into the present day. So today, if you were to ask me that, I would say this moment right here. This moment right here is successful it's just success because I'm here. And there's purpose and there's passion, and I'm in the present moment. And to me, that's what's so important. One of the quotes that's in my journal is, I'm perfect in the present moment, because it's not something to achieve. It's who I'm showing up as, because that's all I know to show up as. So success for me is who you are in every moment, who you're being, so that you can continue to learn and grow into future, days, moments, whatever you might call it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The idea that success is not so much a destination, but a series of moments where we are authentic, we show up, and there's passion, there's purpose, and we are here in this present moment, and that makes us successful. I love that. Listeners, you really can and should connect with Lindsay. You can find her on social media. Twitter, the handle is at ltitus828. That's the Twitter handle. On Instagram, the handle is at LindsayTitusEDU. Her website is www.defineuniversity.com. Again, remember that U in university is YOU. And of course, she is a podcaster as well. She hosts the Define University show podcast with Lindsay Titus. Lindsay, you've been on about a 10-month hiatus. You're about to bring some episodes back. You mentioned that you had just had your second child. So congratulations on your second child. And of course, we've seen pictures on Instagram. And of course, like they're great pictures, cute pictures, and certainly you appear to be thriving as I wouldn't say new mother, because you're not a new mother, but you're a renewed mother to an infant in the work. So we, as selfishly as listeners, we're going to look forward to some new content coming out on the podcast. Listeners, I'll have links for all of the social media handles, the website, and the podcast in the show notes as we go. Lindsay, really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, to meet with you. Thanks for being here. I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate the time, and I had a blast. So thank you.